Hey everyone, welcome to week 189. And oh man, so Adam is coming in hot. We got bumped out of our normal studio. So we're in the wisdom conference room. So we'll see if that name is a misnomer or not. But yeah, so Adam's here. Supposedly traffic was really, really bad because I heard that the VP is coming in town to dish up some word salads. So, we'll see what happens. But we're going to be talking about 2024 and what's in store. So I am not the great Karnak. Adam is here. Are you the great Karnak?
No, I'm not the great Karnak. Jack is the great Karnak.
Jack. Good. Somebody has to be the great Karnak.
Okay, remember what we're supposed to be doing, lowering people's expectations so that way we are brilliant by the time we're done. Yes.
Okay, well, that works. And I think you had some other things that you wanted to grift on a little bit before we get into some of the business forecasting. Who knows whether Jack and the great Karnak is going to be right or not. If you don't have the envelope, I don't know that you are. So it is cold. Like our office is cold today. I don't know what the deal is.
I may open up the door even though we're not here.
So yeah, it's not as cold as my cold plunge, but it's getting like, I'm glad I didn't do a cold plunge this morning because I wouldn't have gotten warm enough yet. So anyway, Jack, did you have some things that you had to go on? Or hey, before we even do that, Adam, anything from Corporate Transparency Act with clients that have been pinging us in the last week, or anything that you want to hit on that, or anything else before Jack and great Karnak comes?
That's a good one. Nothing outside of continued ranting of either A, this is crazy, or B, doesn't the government realize they already have this information? So yeah, told them, get in line in terms of the people who don't see the logic in any of this. So not much more there. I think what we'll probably end up doing from our end is not too dissimilar to what Jack's going to do, is just amp up the awareness, pretty similar to what we do in terms of letting clients know it's their responsibility to file their annual reports, that we don't do that for them, whereas it's something that we used to do back in the past. So we'll probably do something pretty similar, which is y'all need to do this, here are the instructions, and then
yeah, you can do it yourself, or hire your attorney.
Yeah, people need to be responsible after that,
or go to Jack if he's not your attorney, and then he will be your attorney.
That's right.
Yes, bring it on. So for us on the CTA stuff, basically same as we talked about last week, which was, and for those who didn't see last week, I went through pretty much 45-50 minutes of the highlights of the Corporate Transparency Act, concluding that it is more challenging and sophisticated as far as the decisions go. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it really isn't for kind of us ordinary people that are opening up a new entity. And really what will happen is towards the second half of this year, particularly fourth quarter, there's going to be a run on, unless the law changes, a run on the database and attorneys and CPAs and everyone else to get this stuff done. And many CPAs are punting to their attorneys, to the attorneys. There are entities out there that will be popping up to assist, and again, being fraught with scams and everything else. So, be a little bit suspicious about offers to assist. Many will be legit. Some of those will be taking advantage of others. And then, as we said before, kind of one of the highlights is that for most current businesses, there's not a reporting requirement until the beginning of 2025. So, and then you have 30 days then after. So that's why I'm saying it's going to be a big run on the database, it's probably going to crash. Similar to if you have anyone that is trying to put their FAFSA information in for scholarships, it's a little bit frustrating in that there's a link that doesn't work, and then it works, and then it cuts you out. And so it's just a horrible. They redid it recently and they did a horrible job, but it's federal government. Okay, so two kind of
Hey, just
non-business
one
go ahead.
thing before we leave Corporate Transparency Act. So anybody, is my understanding, Jack, you shout me down if I'm wrong, but anybody that's formed an entity this year as of 1/1 or beyond, you got 90 days to
Yes.
do it.
And I already have two of those that we're going to be doing. Now we're implementing certain formalities like an additional questionnaire and other things that we talked about last week. But and I was very clear with an entity that is a non-US entity that I got the impression that they didn't want to necessarily disclose higher ups on the corporate chain. And I told them, you're going to have to do that. And I said, you're going to have to do it within 90 days if you wait until January 1st. If you do it before January 1st, you have until 2025 to do it. And they really wanted it to be a 2024 formation, not a 23 formation, even though it really didn't make a huge difference. But they were insistent about that. So yes, long-winded way of saying yes, you are correct.
So you got 79 days if you did it as effective 1/1. So there you go. Simple math.
Correct. All right. So a couple things, non-business related. Well, I mean, sort of business related, but so let's talk about the NFL. The NFL lost several of its, and this is from the Wall Street Journal Business and Finance page this morning. NFL lost several of its biggest stars to injuries during the just completed regular season, including, and they talk about quarterbacks in other words. However, there was saving grace. They have a new spokesperson that they are not unveiling just yet. That spokesperson's name or initials are TS. And so, more to come about that. And so, and that's totally made up. But it's interesting.
That's a dad joke, man. Come on.
It is. But I mean, the reality is, and this is, front page of the business and finance section. So a little statistics that an average of 17.9 million people watched NFL games this season, which is a 7% increase from a year earlier. It's the highest regular season average since 2015. That includes both TV and streaming viewership. Now, they did mention things like the NFL expanded its viewing platforms on Amazon and others. So there are other factors, but if you noticed, if you watched any Chiefs games, there was a lot of focus on Taylor Swift at the beginning, and now you don't see so much of her because it's very distracting. And I think that there were some discussions that went on behind the scenes as to what is an appropriate distraction and kind of thing. So. But I just, again, I talked about Taylor Swift last week and how I was amazed after watching her concert and everything else. But so that's just, a little information, non-business related.
As a Chiefs fan growing up in Kansas, she has been a distraction to the team's performance. I'm just saying, there's no doubt about it.
I would imagine. I mean, I can imagine that some of the players, get distracted. Some of the spouses get distracted, which then distracts the players. And it's like, oh, did you see Taylor at the game or kind of thing. And so, okay. In the Wall Street Journal on the front page every day, there's a little box down in the left-hand corner that it's like the bizarre news reporting, just to give a little bit of levity, I think, to the Wall Street Journal and the issues of the day. So this was on Tuesday. Just so you know, I mean, you got to know these things. UFO clubs aren't so spacey now. For many years, the Connecticut chapter of the America's largest UFO research group investigated alien life on Earth from the shadows. That wasn't by choice. It was because almost nobody ever came to meetings in a suburban basement just outside of Hartford. But times are changing. And the reason being is that Congress has actually openly had hearings about UFOs, and I don't know, I haven't been watching it, but maybe allowed some testimony from former Air Force pilots and things like that, of things they've seen. And so I don't know what's going on with that, but I was like, okay, that was just kind of, it's one of those things that you just look at and you're like, okay. I mean, I personally think, and I'm a sci-fi guy, but I think it's arrogant to think that Earth and humans are the only sentient beings in the entire universe, other than God. And so, and I wouldn't be surprised sometime down the road we find out that they've been amongst us for many years and just kind of living peacefully amongst us, kind of thing. So
did they make the pyramids? That's my question.
that is interesting. Yeah. And then the whole, what was the Stargate, right? That dealt with pyramids and all that stuff, was interesting. Okay. Now to some business things.
All right.
Another article in the Wall Street Journal on the same page as the UFO article was nearly a fifth of office space sits vacant. It's the highest on record.
Wow.
Staggering 19.6% of office space in major US cities wasn't leased as of the fourth quarter, up from 18.8% a year earlier. It is slightly above the previous records of 19.3 set in 1986 and 1991, and the highest number since at least 1979, which is as far back as Moody's goes in this reporting. So that impacts a lot of us that are looking for space. It impacts, I think, negotiations on current space. So if you're about to renew a lease, that's fantastic news for you. If you are in a position like we are, which is we're nowhere near our renewal, then we're SOL. And so, something to think about. But this focuses on really, like uptown Class A space, really. But I think the impact is across the board. And you have like Class B spaces, I know here in Charlotte, that are converting to kind of like an B plus, A minus space in order to attract. But there is the issue of how much do you spend in order to attract new tenants or keep the tenants from going to the next shiny thing, because it only costs a little bit more than what they're already paying and they're getting a lot of benefit from that. So there's a really large competition going on for your tenant dollars around the country. So something to keep in mind about that. And I'll just keep going and you guys stop me when we get to something that we want to elaborate on. But a couple things, and what I want to do also is talk about the Great Resignation, about pay rates and things like that, but a couple of just kind of tangential things going on. So there was this move in the US House, or actually by various states and administrative regulatory agencies, to create a joint employer link between franchisors and franchisees, licensors and licensees. And it failed the first time and it got revived. And there's a vote tomorrow on this in the House. Here's why it matters. The resolution, meaning the anti-law, would protect franchising long-term by preserving the current direct control joint employer standard. So what was proposed is something softer than that, which is that, and if you may remember, there was years ago, an employee in a drive-thru at McDonald's allegedly dumped coffee into the guy's car onto his lap, and it was burning, and he had medical issues and all kinds of stuff. And they were saying McDonald's corporate is responsible for that because they are the ones who caused the franchisee to purchase the machines, or release the machines. They're the ones who essentially indirectly determined the temperature. They are the ones who selected the vendors for the lids and for the cups and everything else. And so it's like, well, no, that isn't, it's an independent contractor relationship, and you can't link the two together like that. It would basically destroy franchising. And you can imagine, McDonald's, Burger King, KFC, none of those are going to let this happen. But to get to the US House to have to put something on the floor to be voted to be against this proposed rule that would go into effect is, I mean, I think ridiculous. And I've been doing franchising for over 20 years, and this is just, I'm really surprised that this continues to be a topic of discussion and having to fight back on this. So
Let's call a spade a spade. It's going after the big pocket of money versus the small pockets of money with the franchisees. I mean,
absolutely.
it's bonehead simple, to understand what's going on there.
Yes. Another legal term that I use often, bonehead. So thank you
Yeah,
for.
well, that's a Kansas term. You can
Yes.
use it.
Oh, really? Okay, good.
Yeah, yeah, we'll let you use it.
Maybe that's why my father-in-law calls me that occasionally. He's from Kansas. I'm just kidding. All right. All right.
Bonehead.
Next topic. And I love having this session at the beginning of the year because we kind of get to talk about things, and it's a lot of not random. I mean, it's not necessarily random, but it is, a lot of different things that have happened and may continue to happen moving forward. So it provides a variety of things to talk about. So the next thing that I pulled is that the U.S. Department of Labor is trying to enact an independent contractor rule that will impact a lot of us. Okay, so this is more of a common threat to business owners. And here's the snippet. On January 9th, which was 2 days ago, the U.S. Department of Labor released a final rule outlining criteria for determining whether a worker is an employee or an independent contractor under the federal wage and hour law. Why does this matter? The long-awaited rule uses a non-exclusive multi-factor totality of circumstances test and takes effect March 11th, 2024. So in about exactly
so
2 months.
Elaborate and let's stick around and hang on this one.
Yeah, okay. So the IFA, which is the International Franchise Association, basically noted that the rule would not undermine, well, I don't want to go into that. What to expect are legal challenges and congressional opposition with plans to revoke it under the Congressional Review Act already announced by a U.S. Senator in Louisiana. Now, so let's go deeper into this. This new rule would impact companies because it potentially would classify millions of workers that were previously classified as independent contractors as employees. The new rule expands the so-called economic reality test so that employers have to weigh a wider variety of factors when classifying workers, including how much control the worker has over their own schedule and their employment, how permanent their employment is, how integral their work is to the work of the company, and that's just 3 of the 6 factors. Misclassifying employees is a serious issue that deprives workers of basic rights and protections, says the acting Secretary of Labor. So that's the justification. And the reason being is, I mean, that it's a true statement that if you misclassify someone as an independent contractor, you're not providing them certain things like workers' compensation and collecting payroll tax and those kind of things. You're relying upon them. So the statement is true, but it's taken out of context, I believe, in as this goes. The opposition position is that under the rules multi-factor test, employers will now be forced to guess which factors should be given the greatest weight in making the determination. Instead of promoting much needed economic growth and protecting legitimate independent contractors, the final rule will result in more confusion and expensive, time-consuming, unnecessary, and often frivolous litigation, as both employers and workers will not understand who qualifies. My litigators are like, okay, fine, bring it on. That keeps them employed for a period of time. One of the biggest factors is this managerial skill component, which the potential independent contractor has the ability to hire or fire additional workers or in other ways manage their business. And they gave an example of a landscaping company that performs assignments only as directed, does not independently choose assignments, solicits works from other clients, advertises their own services or work to reduce costs as not an independent contractor. And then they had a comparison where there's more independent thought. So Yeah, and this article goes into what is definitions. And then one last point is that this was really focused on what we now call gig workers. So, kind of temporary workers. And it is expanded beyond that, so that it said that while the gig economy is huge, with 36% of US workers reporting some level of gig work. And what it doesn't say is, do you have your main employment and then you're doing these gigs on the side? But as the numbers are increasing as to who this might impact one way or another. So I'll stop there because I hit everyone with a lot of stuff, but
Yeah, that
what are your thoughts on that?
and what was the March 11 significance?
That's when the rule, if it's not opposed or reversed or revoked or put on hold, that's when these rules go into effect. Where as of March 11th, if you are going to hire someone, you need to make sure that you are hiring them in the appropriate category, as the appropriate category. So are they your employee, or are they an independent contractor? Are you going to collect payroll taxes? Are you going to provide workers' comp for them or not? And so, and basically the rule has changed because there's more to think about. It's like if the decision tree had maybe 3 or 4 things that you had to go through: yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Now the decision tree is larger in order to get to whether or not it is an employee or not an employee.
Yeah. And we've got a question from Jim, and then I have a very definite opinion and some ideas on the subject.
All right, Jim Marascio, good to see you here, buddy. Jack, that's only for contractors and employees based in the US, correct? Even if they're doing work on behalf of a US company and for a US customer?
Yeah, I mean, the expanse of this proposed rule is a little bit ambiguous and nebulous with respect to how, either if it's a foreign company that is doing business in the US that's hiring people, or kind of vice versa, because you have various laws and tax treaties and everything else that deal with how do you deal with employees that are multi-jurisdictional and those kind of things. But yeah, the focus of these rules are for US based employees working for US companies.
Yeah. So I think this is one of those things where, there's much ado about nothing. I mean, it is a big deal. Like, it's actually a very big deal, especially for like Uber, DoorDash, companies like that. But if you think about like, the typical BGW shoemaker client, is this a big deal or not? My answer to that is that because people ask this question all the time, hey, how do I classify people? What could happen? And I think the guidance that I'm about to give is really not that much different than in this new environment versus, what is in existence today, which really comes down to, if Gary and I are working together and Gary said, and I'm like, Gary, we'd love to have you, come on board. And Gary says, that's great. Can I be an independent contractor? Because that's what I've been. And I got my total set up. I've got my S Corp set up. I got that's what I want. Like, I'm asking for that, You're probably going to be fine, because in that scenario, like, I can kind of back into, well, then what's the way that I'm going to pay you and button this up in terms of like, documentation around, you are an independent contractor meeting this guidance. Because on the flip side of that, if I kind of look at my risks, which is Gary gets pissed off at me when I have to can Gary, and Gary goes and files an unemployment claim and then says, well, that guy screwed me. He made me an independent contractor when I really should have been an employee. When his unemployment claim gets denied, that, okay, I'm buttoned up, like we were very clear, on what the nature of the relationship is at this point, to where we can both feel good about, erring on the side of, I went down this path. And in that scenario, Gary and I are both, probably pretty sophisticated in the financial arrangement, in that Gary knows that if he worked for BGW, his paycheck would be 100 grand, but his true compensation is really 120 because I'm covering his employer. I'm covering the employer portion of his payroll taxes, plus what we're going to do for a health insurance, thing, and then also his 401k match. So Gary's going to ask for 120, and I'm going to be happy to pay it because I'm neutral, on the subject.
Yeah.
Where people are going to come into real problems is that in that same exact scenario, Gary doesn't know what the hell I'm talking about when I'm talking to independent contractor. He's like, okay, well, whatever. I just want a job, number one.
Yeah.
Number two is when I actually pay Gary 100, not 120.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, Gary's got to pay his taxes. He's like, what happened? On this.
And Gary's only working for Adam.
Yeah, Gary's only working for Adam, only ever been working for Adam. I've got people that are employees that are doing literally the exact same thing. Like no variant, can't even make a case. Like I got no case that there's a variance between the employee and the independent contractor in terms of the way that I pay them, how they're supervised, any of that kind of stuff. That another bad fact for me. So I feel like this is one of those things where like, look, I mean, is it something that's really necessary that the government do? I don't know. Like, I'm not going to weigh in on that or not. I mean, because there's I think there's equally as many people that are driving for Uber that are happy with the relationship as are unhappy. So like my son did DoorDash. He didn't give a shit. Give me W-2, give me 1099. I don't know what the hell any of it means anyway. And I'm just happy to earn like $1,000 before I go back to college. So it's actually probably more of a hassle than anything else. Because what he liked about his DoorDash relationship was it was literally like a 2-second process that involved where do you put the money in the bank account and fill out this W-9, versus everything that's involved with payroll and getting a W-2. So that's really a tough one. But for our clients, my guidance would really be, if you always have had a pattern of 1099s, I don't really know if I would do a whole lot. If I've got a scenario where I've got, and the only caveat to that would be, first off, if you've only ever had a pattern of 1099s and you're their only source of income and it's been years, you're establishing a bad fact pattern. If anybody, even if there's no complaints, you're establishing a bad fact pattern. Mm-hmm. If somebody were to go looking, you're also leaving a tax deduction on the table because you don't qualify for the qualified business income deduction in that standpoint, because those were wages that count. Secondly, you screwed yourself on PPP, but you already know that at this point. Because you didn't have any employees, you only had independent contractors. So you kind of go back to, am I really gaining from having Gary be an independent contractor or not? Like that's a legitimate question that you should be asking yourself to see, is this really creating any true financial gain for you or not, versus just converting him. But, if it's been a relationship you've been in for a while, it hadn't been a problem so far, I wouldn't go rushing to change anything or really do anything different. I think it's the people that have been like, forcing people like Uber, in that scenario, it's like, I'm forcing some classes of people into relationships that they don't want to be in because they don't have a choice. That's where, in other words, like you want the job, you're going to be a freaking 1099, Gary, period. It's like, right. In a perfect world, Gary does have a choice, but in reality, kind of maybe he doesn't have a choice, and you're really, and especially if you're doing it in a scenario where, you're paying Gary 100 when you really should be 120, that's where, if that's your scenario, you really need to look at this and either fix what you're doing for Gary or consider the conversion option. Cause you're not, you're not standing on solid ground, you know, if you have to go before the court in that position. But we get out even today, you know, even though the rule is a little bit more lax. I mean, we get asked this question all the time. And honestly, you know, since doing this since 2006, you know, what I was, and this could change, so knock on wood, but in an audit, it's never come up. Like employment classification has never come up. The only time even a 1099 has come up has been when I didn't issue them, but I took the deduction anyway. So like I'm a bar and I paid the band in cash. You know, like that's the only time it's ever come up. Like nobody's ever come up and said, "Oh my God, you misclassified Gary. You know, we're coming out." Like zero. You know, it's not say it's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's never come up. The only time that it's come up has been when an aggrieved contractor has notified the Department of Labor or the state of North Carolina that they felt taken advantage of. That's it. Because even like in the scenario of the workers' comp, I mean, the reality, yeah, I don't have to offer workers' comp on them. The reality is that you actually, if they're working for you, they're supposed to be covered by you. So like in the construction business, you're covering them anyway. Like unless Gary can prove to you that he's got it, guess what? You got it. You know, so it's like you're doing it anyway. You know, and presumably if Gary has to do it, that's a factor in what I pay him. So I'm really paying, like, unless I'm worried about the mod rate, I'm paying it either way. Like, what's the difference, you know, to me? So soapbox done. And Jack, if I broke the law with any of that, you know, correct my problem.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. La, State Bar, no call. Are we recording this?
A couple, maybe two additional things on that. So one is that if theoretically, if there is a misclassification, and let's say that independent contractor was really an employee and they didn't pay the payroll tax, I think that I'm pretty sure that the government can come after the employer for the misclassification and say, pay the payroll tax, I believe. And so that you know, again, academic, is that an issue? So, you know, why put yourself in that situation and you know, classify them appropriately as an employee? I mean, it really does come down to the fundamental control. And I'm hopeful that they don't expand the factors, because then all it's going to do is just create chaos. And then I think that people are going to get letters from the U.S. Department of Labor and from the state of North Carolina and South Carolina that is just going to create problems for this. But yeah, similarly, when it's come up, it's been someone is complaining because they feel like that they are owed money and they don't have to hire an attorney. Let's go talk to the government, and they are required to investigate this. And many times what happens is that, you know, interestingly, in one case, it started out with one person complaining. Client provides all the reporting and it was all proper, and found out actually that they overpaid this employee. And the others that were, because what happens is this one person, and then the U.S. Department of Labor wants to see everything. And then if they find some anomaly, they're going to say, well, what about this person? What about this person? What about this person? And so we had to go through all that. And then it was, oh, hey, so, and it was dealing with tips. And it was that not only was there a mandatory tip that was in the when you get the printout for the check, but you could put additional tip on there. And so it was the way it was reported, and that the initial tip is not really tip money that it has to go to the worker necessarily. And again, I'm totally murdering this because I wasn't the one who handled it, but let's just say that is kind of what the conclusion was. So it showed a significant overpayment. Once we shared that with the officer at the Department of Labor, we never heard anything back on it. Case closed, kind of thing. So you know, but okay. So I have some other things that I think we should talk about, and two related things are soaring salaries
So
and the great resignation. But yeah, go ahead.
can I go back, close the loop on the 1099?
Yeah.
So in other words, to anybody listening or listening to this on a recording, before you get all pissed off and panic, look at the actual economic impact of the conversion. And my experience has been that at worst it's typically neutral. Sometimes you actually get a tax benefit from it. So don't get all hot and bothered, until you know your facts.
Yes, this is not fear factor. So we're not trying to put
Yeah,
fear
that's
into
right.
people, right?
Unless
Okay.
you have an asleep at the wheel accounting firm.
Yeah,
Because
that's
we
right.
have seen that.
Yeah. That's right.
Like, whoa. Big miss.
All right,
keep
two
going.
other topics, and these are some articles that I pulled from the Charlotte Business Journal in the past week or so, and they're related to each other. And it's talking. The title of the article is "The Great Resignation is Over. Prepare for the Big Stay in 2024." And just some kind of a few quotes from the article. The COVID-19 pandemic fueled a historic level of workers quitting their jobs and what became known as the Great Resignation. Workers resigned from 50 million jobs last year, the highest number since the government started tracking quits in the year 2000. Workers who switched jobs during the pandemic saw big gains in pay. And the thought is that in 2024, workers who were ready to jump ship for better pay need to do a little more due diligence in where they might jump to and where they're jumping from, and is it really that bad? And do a cost benefit analysis. And basically, and I actually had this discussion this morning with someone as to, okay, if the employee thinks that it is better because it was a panic as to, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do because I think I'm going to lose a key employee. If that employee thinks it's better on the other side of things, then they need to decide to do that. But the biggest risk is last in, first out when there's cuts. You don't have that longevity. And something else that was brought up in here is, it's a short period of time to show your worth to that new employer. So if they are going to have to cut or make decisions, it is who has had the most impact on the business. And if you have no track record with that company. So, those are the issues that I think employers need to think about. The article also talks about that companies are more reluctant to offer big pay packages and extend big offers to talent where they were in the past. Part of that is being gun shy in that they offered this stuff and apparently it wasn't enough because those people continue to jump and jump and jump and leapfrog into various positions. The cost of training someone and bringing someone on board can be pretty significant because, at least here at Shoemaker, they spend several days going through things, getting up to speed, learning our computer systems, learning our timesheets and everything else that goes on. In addition to, okay, this is how we do, you have the law and you have the process and papers and drafting everything else, but this is how we do it as Shoemaker versus maybe how you had done it at your prior firm or company. So a key here, and we've talked about this many times in the past, is the non-monetary benefits and the discussion in this article about how you need to think about, as an employer, need to think about those things. Okay. Is it that your employees really enjoy having Coke and Diet Coke in the fridge and they don't have to pay 50 cents for it? Or, is it that you have dress down Fridays where you don't have to, you can wear a pair of jeans and be tactful about it and don't come in with, um, uh, t-shirt and that kind of thing. But so what is important? And that goes back to something else we've talked about, which is how are you ever going to know what's important unless you actually talk to your employees and ask them what's important to them? And so many employers get so wrapped up in thinking that they know what is best for their employees because that was what is best for them or was best for them when they were in that position. And, very easily you take someone who's in their 50s and someone who's in their 30s, and what is important to each of them, even though they may be in similar positions, is going to be much different. And so, have that in mind.
So
Another,
don't leave this one yet,
yep,
Shaq, because I
yeah,
just
yeah.
came in off of being in it was about a
Now let me shut
14,
the door.
yeah, a 14 person roundtable, and talking about employee incentives versus retention. And the data was really mind blowing to me because Kevin Monahan, if anybody out there knows him, he's one sharp cookie, and he does a lot of stuff around retention versus incentives. And what was interesting to me is how it says our internet is unstable. Hopefully you guys are hearing this okay.
I still hear you. You're good.
Okay, cool. That the savings rate in 1983 versus 2023, 1983 was 32% of the income was saved in 401ks, that sort of thing. It's now only 5.2%. And there's this huge come to Jesus that's going to be happening where, this younger workforce wants everything now, et cetera, but they're not saving enough. And so what are the things that you can do? The other thing that was interesting was he did a show of hands, and these are all business owners in the room. How many people have done incentives like bonuses and stuff like that where people were actually backfired? And it was like 100% of the room hands went up.
Yeah.
And right, exactly. And
meaning me
yeah,
too.
Yeah. And so what was also interesting is that those below the age of 30 are very free to share their compensation and their incentives and all that with everybody else. Like, it's just really interesting because that was very taboo in my generation. And he said it's like there's science behind it. It's like a 90-day dopamine hit, but then what happens is entitlement happens. And so then let's say you have a down year, and it was he gave an example, and I'm trying to remember. It was Netflix. They decided they were just creating all this bad morale and everything. They thought they were doing incentives, and he uses the science of the brain, which was really interesting to kind of prove this fact. And it even goes back to Julius Caesar. So Julius Caesar was using incentives back in the Roman Empire, right? And he was rewarding his warriors with land when they would come back from their conquests, and hey, great job. Well, the problem is the warriors started bickering about, well, who got that land versus what land? I didn't get much land. How come you got more land than I did? And then basically it created these wars, and he was assassinated. It's like, and then I think it was his nephew. I don't think it was his son. I think it was his nephew that came up and basically created a pension system, which you had longer term incentives and like, hey, we're building something for the future, which I thought was really interesting. So that whole mindset of, well, we'll give them more stuff, it actually backfires. Which is like,
Yeah,
it was mind-boggling. So anyway,
yeah, I think to that point, Gary, I think that you can hear that at face value. I promise I wasn't responding to text when I was looking at the phone. I was looking up something on the second point, which sort of gets to like, okay, this is the problem that like we're facing at BGW in Charlotte, and I suspect Jack is facing it at Shoemaker. I think our clients are facing it too. This is specific to Charlotte, but it could be applied to other markets. You can say, well, the savings rate back in 1983 was 30 some odd percent, and now it's at 5%. That's a true statement. At the same time, let's say they were all Dave Ramsey disciples for a minute, and you just say, okay, well, what's the amount that I should spend on my home, relative to
Oh,
my
yeah.
income rate?
Yeah.
And it's 25%. So if you just do a quick calculation, to afford the medium house price in Charlotte, you'd have to make $120,000.
Yeah.
So I think my thesis, like, is if you plotted those two things together, is it's not that the younger generation is like, full steam ahead, man, I'm going to spend money like a drunken sailor.
Yeah,
I simply
that's
think
right.
that the savings that happened in 83 is now being consumed by housing.
Yeah.
And it's like, so like, for them, it's like, how there was like always this sort of theory that it's not a theory, it was like a proven thing in terms of like the happiness quotient, in terms of like, okay, when does money buy happiness? And the answer is up to basic economic safety, which when they did the study was like $78,000.
Yeah, that's right.
It actually is a real driver of happiness, because it means that you can buy groceries, everything else, all that stuff. I just think that number, like, if you're to normalize that number for Charlotte, I just think the number's gone up, so like, I'm not advocating, rush out and, go give everybody raises, but it's like, I think that's like a real thing, for our people, especially when you're like, look, a lot of them live in apartments around here. And when my kids are about to face it, because my kids are about to graduate, it's like, holy crap, they're going to have to spend 50% of what they make just on a freaking place to live. And there's not a damn thing that can be done about that. Yeah. Like, there's nothing. Like, that's with roommates. Like, there's nothing that can be done about that. So it's like, there is something to like, like, I could sit back here and ballyhoo around, oh, it's a bunch of bullshit, they're entitled, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I think there's like, for some of them, like, there really is a basic economic safety argument to be made here. All that said, so I want to live on my end of the bargain, and give people a path to be able to do that. All that said, I think what we're also seeing at BGW, I'm sure this would never happen with anybody on the call or at Shoemaker, but since the dawn of man, there's always a misalignment between like, I thought I did freaking amazing, and you boss man, not so much. And neither one of us were communicating effectively. So then it comes time to have the raise discussion, and we're both pissed off, So I think what, now that it's now officially time to have salary discussions with the BGW folks, and ironically, that's also been coupled with, by the way, here's going to be your annual fee increase for next year. It's like we're taking it on both ends. On the one end, it's like, discussing employee raises. On the other end, letting customers know what the next year bill is going to be, and everybody's freaking complaining. Across.
It's been a rough start.
It's been a rough January. From a 2024 perspective. Thank God for Rupert Murdoch and the Wall Street Journal for bashing the accounting profession so hard that at least I've got my own data to say, look, dude, you know how hard it is to freaking find people right now? But my only point in saying that is what it's done for us at BGW is to double down on the resolve to, we got to be better about giving people real-time feedback to know exactly where they stand and exactly what they need to be doing to earn more money. Because like everybody else that raised their hand, in the room that said, 100% of us, hey, it didn't work. Well, if you did, my own observation of why it didn't work, the answer is because you did not get the behavior that you were looking for out of the incentive. Well, that's a two-part problem. One is the employee didn't change their behavior, and two is you didn't let them know that they didn't change their behavior. So like, you both bear responsibility in that. And what we will be doing at BGW as the leadership team will be keeping our side of the street clean, which is, ain't nobody not going to know what attitude or behavior they're going to need to change around here in 2024.
Yeah.
We thought we did a pretty good job of it in 2023. At the same time, I still would give us a C, and we need to be A's and A pluses in that department. But that would never happen at Shoemaker. New associate knows exactly where they stand at all times. Correct, Jack?
Yeah, but let's say if that were not the case, let's say that
for a friend.
at a different law firm. So interesting you say that, because I was intending on having a gathering of partners in my practice group as the service line leader, and I don't have all the information that I need from our financial side of things, from our CFO, that because you have to present, I think, objectively the performance from last year and show the different metrics, and show that, not to embarrass anybody, but amongst the owners in my practice group, that I want to first have a meeting with the equity partners, then with the practice group, and then with the staff, and just kind of filter the information through, so that you can say, okay, this is what we did well. I mean, you start out with what you did well. You don't want to go into that discussion with saying, okay, we sucked and this is how we sucked, and oh, by the way, we did a few good things. That's the complete opposite of what you should be doing. But to go into that meeting, so yes, I postponed that meeting until next week, until I can get more information, because our finance people are understandably distracted with year-end stuff, and getting, as you said, people's compensation from last year, their potential compensation for next year, and having the management committee go around to each attorney and saying what it's going to be before they actually get it by the 15th and get it in their bank account, kind of thing. Interestingly, the discussion about pay is a great segue. And what you said, Gary, I'm going to go kind of the end of this other article that I have, that there was a survey about by resumebuilder.com that said about half of the companies surveyed that planned salary hikes in 2024 will give fewer than half of their employees raises. And then it also talks about at a time when the focus on pay equity and pay transparency is increasing and the talent market is expected to remain tight, managers could face consequences for those decisions. So you're talking about how it was kind of sacred that you don't tell your coworker, you're like, yeah, I did fine. I'm not so happy, but it's like, okay, wait a minute, here's the dollar amount, and they're comparing it, and and they really don't understand maybe the subjective factors that went into the objective factors and subjective factors that differentiate two different people, because they weren't in that compensation discussion that you had with that individual. And so, hearing that information as a snippet and a point of comparison is has been a challenge for us here and for others. But there's also discussion about stabilization of the growth of jobs and wages, which is in line with macroeconomics. So this is something that's going on across the board, small, medium, large companies. Turnover has slowed, and it's a focus, as you said, from recruitment to retention and what needs to be done in order to retain employees. And again, the kind of advice and admonition is, don't assume that you know what that is, and understand that you have varying generations, a varying demographic within your workforce that you need to address, and one size doesn't fit all. I've seen clients who have tried to do that and say, okay, here is the Band-Aid. Here's what we're going to do. It's going to be a percentage increase in overall comp across the board, or we're going to implement this program. We're going to do daycare for kids. Well, that's not really helpful to someone who doesn't have kids or has adult kids, maybe for their grandkids, right? That might be, but it's just, again, know your audience that you're trying to provide retention for rather than incentives for.
Yeah. Yeah, that point of people will, there was a quote from one of these business owners that I got to find that I thought was really good, but it was basically when people and I mean, this is like not rocket science here, but people respond way better when they have a sense of ownership and building the solution versus being handed the solution, right? And so it just still comes down to communication versus, okay, here's the edict from on high, you're going to like it,
Yeah.
so Yeah, they said if employees feel like they were part of the process, they're more likely to embrace it and be part of the solution. So, one other thing that I was going to say that, we've been looking at a number of business publications and like, what are they seeing? What are they saying? One of the other things that I think I've seen kind of across the board, regardless of what side of the political persuasion it is, but higher for longer interest rates seems to be another, kind of common theme. So we got used to very, very low interest rates. And, just to put things in context, man, when when I got married, savings account, passbook savings account was paying 10%. 10%. But a mortgage was 16 to 18%. Not credit card, mortgage. I mean, crazy. So, you know, it's our interest rates are not what they once were, 3 years ago, but they think that they will settle lower than where we are now, but higher than what we saw in the 2008 to 2022.
Yeah, I think everything that I'd heard, has been kind of expect about a 2 or 3 percentage point drop, and that's just going to be where it's at, which is kind of back to normal, because I mean they dropped in this level to get us through the '08 recession and the bank bailout, and then they never did anything with them, because like nobody wants to be the guy that raised rates. And there wasn't a huge reason to, because like the levers that would cause them to raise them weren't present, and then at the point where they probably should have considered to start raising them, we go into the zombie apocalypse. So there's no reason to raise. So we're kind of due. I mean, you're welcome. We're kind of due.
Yeah, and things that I've seen that relate to maybe the speed of that. So there was an article, and it was maybe some comments, and it was Tom Barkin, who is the Richmond Federal Reserve Bank president, and he's on the Fed's Open Market Committee, which is the committee that suggests and usually gets their way as far as rates go. It seems he made comments that at the end of the month, this month, it probably will remain unchanged likely. And it may not be until February or March before we start seeing that decrease in rates, because they're not ready to make any decisions based on what they're seeing with respect to employment, unemployment, and inflation, and the speed of the economy, generally speaking. So just some and it seems like that is I've seen that opinion in various places, that don't expect anything really significant in the near future. There's still a lag period, but hopefully still in first quarter that those rates start coming down.
I know we're kind of finishing towards the top of the hour. Another thing that did come up in this roundtable was just some of the geopolitical instability in particular. So one of these guys is CEO of a very, very large furniture retailer, and they have not been impacted by the whole Red Sea, the Houthi rebels and all that kind of stuff, and the mess that's happening there. But Taiwan, there's still stuff happening there, and I know people that in the shoe industry in particular, with some of that stuff that's happening in Asia, those are worrisome things. So it's like, who knows, who knows? But if nothing else that we learned from COVID, and especially almost 4 years ago now, which is hard to believe, isn't it, Jack? That things can happen fairly quickly. And it's important to have your management team on their toes and everybody be diligent and vigilant and being adaptable. I think that's really, really important, because who knows, when we start getting lazy or thinking, oh yeah, everything's going to be great, you know, I think we got a little complacent last year, quite frankly, and it bit us, like execution and following our processes, really, really important.
Yep.
And accountability, really, really important. So anyway, and oh, by the way, Chris did he chimed in here that bonehead simple is an Illinois term as well. So I'm like, well, okay, that's a Midwestern thing, evidently.
Yeah.
So what are we going to talk about next week? Any ideas?
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it
Yeah,
out.
we'll figure it out.
Well,
I'm sure there'll be
and-
plenty of material that will come up in the next 6 days for us to
Oh,
jump
yes.
on, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
right.
So be careful out there on the roadways and don't get too frustrated with your fellow Charlatan drivers, because evidently the VP's in town. So have a great day. We'll put this thing up on the VGW CPA YouTube channel, and Jack will put it up, or one of his associates will put it up on the Shoemaker YouTube channel later on today. But thanks for joining us. We appreciate you guys. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. I gotta meet the goofballs for